Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this fifth lecture in our series of practical writing lectures for Reading University. We're going to be looking at CVs and personal statements, and these two documents pretty much fulfill the same function. One obviously is going to be applying for a university place, and then the other is going to be basically applying for a job position in a company somewhere. They are both kind of interlinked in that they, well, I'll explain this as we go on. They are kind of linked in that they are a document that essentially serves as an interview, where an interview is not really practical. So for example, if you're a foreign student looking to apply to a British university, it might not be practical for you to actually stay up because of the time difference. And because of the actual distance itself, it might not be practical for you to have a face-to-face interview like a lot of university students would have. The personal statement as well is used to cut down on the amount of admin, because basically a lot of the applications are done in the downtime of the university when the actual heads of department aren't there. We'll have a look at both of these in a little bit more detail. Just to give you the sample email from the previous homework exercise, you'll notice in this that we don't actually spend too much time with pleasantries. There is at the end of the email, there is thank you, I'm looking forward, I'm really excited to moving to Dale City, but there are a couple of questions here. So the key thing is that if someone asks if you've got any questions, it's actually a nice idea for you to actually ask some questions just to clarify some points, even if they're not vital questions. So for example, here we've got questions about taxes, whether the city taxes will be paid from directly from the account, or they'll be paid by check on a regular rolling basis. So if someone asks you a question in an email, it's nice to just ask for a couple of questions to show that you're interested, really. There's not really much in the way of difficult English here. A couple of questions, thanks for your time. We need really to thank these people for their time in sending an email from the Housing Association. Again, not terribly difficult English. The tone is the most important thing here, the level of register. We don't really want to annoy these people. We want to reply, but we don't want to appear too distant and too aloof. So just to recap, this is the fifth lecture. We've looked at tone and register. We've looked at writing for business purposes. We've looked at paraphrasing and summarizing. We're now going to move on, and we're going to be looking at writing a personal statement. We're also going to link that in with writing a CV as well. Okay. So in this lecture, we're going to be looking at techniques for effective CVs, effective resumes, writing personal statements. We're going to be developing our awareness. We've already touched on this in the tone and register lecture, but we're going to be looking at how we can actually develop an awareness of the audience that we're writing to. We're going to be in a really unique position for the CV writing and for the personal statement writing, is that they will actually be judging our character and our personality and our suitability for a position either at the university or at the company based on what we've actually written. So it is kind of a unique written document that we really don't find anywhere else in our daily lives. Okay, so we don't see those things basically in our everyday life. In order to actually get to this point, we need to think about our personal journey. We need to be thinking about our professional journey, and we need to think, how can we write that down and make it appealing? How can we make something that is essentially not essentially very exciting? And how can we actually repeat the same thing over and over again? For example, I've been an English teacher at 2 or 3 different institutions, and I've essentially been doing the same job. I've been doing the lectures, I've been doing the exams, I've been giving feedback to students. I need to actually find a way of recycling and rephrasing what I've actually taken away from the job rather than the jobs that I perform. So I'm not really focusing on the idea that I'm competent, even though, I mean, that will be an obvious thing from the level of experience that I've got. So I'm not really focusing on the level of competency that I've got, but we're actually focusing on what we've actually learned from each position and how that's added to our personal development and how it's contributed to the development of our careers. The last part down here is that we need to really make sure that we're standing out from the crowd, that a job will get 600, 700 applicants, and we need to make sure that we are making ourselves unique in a certain field where people are basically the same. We need to be able to show that we've done something that other people can't do, haven't done. We need to show that we've done things that other people haven't done, that we've learned things that other people haven't learned, and that we've taken away from the job things that other people have only just done the job for. Okay, so we really need to be looking at tying in, making things relevant, and making sure that we're tying everything together in a narrative that is engaging for the reader. What is the difference between a CV and a resume? Well, the CV and a personal statement. What is the difference between a CV and a personal statement? Well, the CV will have more details about the education, and it will have more details about employment history as well. Normally with the personal statement is more of a narrative, so you'll see more of a block of text rather than the bullet points of what duties were performed in a certain job. A CV will have less job description, so we're not really too interested in the ins and outs, the everyday ins and outs, the everyday mechanics of your job, but we're actually more interested in what you've actually learned from those positions that you've taken away and how professionally you've grown as you've done these jobs. The CV will also showcase your academic achievements, the CV will showcase your educational achievements, and the CV will also show any research and any volunteer work, any other jobs that you've done. You really don't go into too much detail on the CV, mostly because you can't really go back all the way back to student jobs that you've done. You make things relevant. You pick and you choose, you cherry pick as you write the CV. The personal statement is more a statement of the character and what you expect in the future, whereas the CV will be looking at what you've done in the past and how you've adjusted your personal mission to that particular past. In today's lecture, we will be looking at the function and form of the curriculum vitae. The curriculum vitae is a typically UK, British, English thing. So in the US, they'll be focusing more on a resume, which will be one piece of paper. The CV allows you to go into a lot more detail in terms of your employment history, in terms of your education, and it allows you to actually give some kind of more of a narrative really than the resume. The CV is really a more of a character reference written by you than a simple summary of employment status, employment history and educational achievements. We're going to look at some typical CVs. Again, we've been focusing on this thing throughout. We've been focusing on layout, making things accessible to the readers. We need to make sure that our CV is both fresh and interesting to look at, and it's also not confusing to the casual reader. Remember that these HR people that read these CVs, they will just basically get a stack of these resumes, and they will have to blaze through them, 700, 800 at least, and they will have to pick a short list of maybe about 25 people from that. How are personal statements used? It's very, very important that we look at how these personal statements are used by the academic hiring, how they're actually used by the academies in terms of actually choosing the right candidates for the position. So there are some specific things that they're looking for, and we really need to think about how we can tie in our personal statements to what they're expecting. Character and competence. So we need to look at how the content of the personal statement is going to reflect our character and our competencies to do the actual job, to do the actual academic, to do the lab work, basically, to fit in on campus. We're going to be looking at practical ways of writing content. We're also going to be looking at types of narration. We need to tie these things in with a story. And then we need to look at how we can use transitions effectively in the personal statement to actually create a coherent set of paragraphs that will all link together. So, who uses a CV? Well, the CVs are used across a wide range of careers, a wide range of industries, and pretty much everybody will be using them. I've put artists and designers on here, and they will have a slightly different CV in that they will be able to add a show reel to their CV to actually showcase their past artistic achievements and any commissions that they've had. But basically, anybody from programmers, developers, to academics, to educators, they will all use the CV. It is a basic document in terms of actually getting the job. Okay. In terms of content, there isn't really much that isn't on the CV. What we really need to appreciate is that in the UK especially, and in the US, employment law is quite strict on what should not be on the resume or the CV. There are 7 protected traits in the UK. Obviously, because I'm from the UK, I'm probably more qualified to speak about that. But in terms of race, sex, male or female, religion, grounds, anything like that, you can't discriminate against anybody. Age is another one. You can't discriminate against anybody in the UK for these 7 protected traits. So be careful when you're putting information on your CV that you don't put any of these protected traits on to the CV. Because what will happen is that the person will see it and the person will read it, and if there is anything that could possibly lead to a lawsuit in the future, they will throw it immediately in the bin, and you will say you have not been contacted, you have not been considered for this position. One of the big major differences between Chinese-style CVs and Western-style CVs is that you don't put your photograph on the CV. You don't need to do that because it is just an open door for a lawsuit in the future, so please be aware of that. Information does go on this, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that you don't need to put male or female, you don't need to put your date of birth, you put everything that is relevant for the position, you don't put anything else. Okay. If you're looking at an educator's position, an academic position, what you might want to add is teaching style, teaching methodology. You'll be looking at things like service organizations that you've been a member of, and any organizations and any committees that you've been a member of as you progress up in your academic career. Again, this is something that you might add as a freelancer as well, but please do be aware that from the point of being an educator, from the point of being an academic, there is a little bit of extra information that will be needed as you go in and as you progress through your career, if that is something that you'll be looking to pursue. Essentially, anything else that you want to add on, you can add on. Make sure that it's signposted with a heading. Make sure that we've got things like professional development, pedagogy, teaching, certificates, civic engagements. You'll be able to add these things. Don't go on for too long. If you've gone on for 5 or 6 pages, you really need to start thinking about editing down your CV. You can start off with that amount of material, and then you can condense it, and you can contract it, and you can edit down. But you don't need to add all of these things. All of these things can appear on the CV. You don't necessarily need to add them on there if you're really struggling, you're trying to, you met the mayor of Beijing a few months ago. You don't need to add that into civic engagements. If you don't have it, don't try and make something up. Don't try and pad something out, because in terms of the CV, it's basically the first step in the interview, and you'll be asked about this in the interview. So if you're not sure and you won't be able to answer the question about it in the interview, don't put it on there. Okay. The variable, the big variations that happen on CVs are essentially the formats. The placements of the headings should be in logical order. There is no standard CV format. It should be logical. You start off with your personal details, then your academic achievements, and then your employment history, and then any personal details, any other personal details, personal objectives, mission statements come at the end after that. You really want the employment history and the academic achievements front and center. You don't want to have the HR person digging through 3 pages and trying to figure out what it is you're qualified to do and what it is you've actually done in the past. Just make sure things are very clear and signposted. If you have problems looking for it, write the CV, put it away, come back to it. If you have problems looking for it, looking for the relevant information, then you need to think about rewriting things. Okay. When it comes to actually detailing your education, you need to make sure that you've illustrated the values. We're not really interested in too much in the day-to-day duties that you've performed in the job. That basically everybody has done these things in an office. Everybody has prepared a lecture. Everybody knows how to make a PowerPoint presentation. Everybody knows how to do, organized grading, and you don't need to put this minute detail on here. Add the value to your academic achievements. Tell people what you've taken away from these positions and tie it into your overall objective in terms of your career. You don't really need to say, well, I can use Word and I can use Microsoft PowerPoint. That is a given these days. The actual bar of this is actually part of the expectations. So all the way through, you need to be looking at the descriptions of the jobs that you've done and adding value to those jobs. Okay. So yes, you might have been a penniless student by the time that you graduated and you took a job because of the money. But try and retrospectively look back at that and what did you get from that? What did you take away from that experience, and tell people how it's made you a more valuable asset for them. Okay. In terms of actual practical, practical advice, reverse chronological order. Things should be listed in terms of your education and your career. Your employment history should all be in reverse chronological order, which basically means it starts at the oldest and starts at the most recent and goes back to the earliest. So in terms of improving this organization and in terms of tying in what you've taken from those jobs that you've had and adding them and adding value to them, you go back to the job advert. Okay, so you go back to the job advert and you see if there are any repeated words. This is an old trick for learning languages, that if you look at a word that is repeated throughout the dialogue or throughout the chapter of a certain textbook, you know this is an important word that you need to learn. Go back to the job advert, see if there's anything that is repeated all the way through. See how your employment history can tie in with that key word. Okay. Look for any jargon, look for any technical language. Try and use that technical language in the job descriptions that you've got, in the actual academic descriptions that you're going to give them. You can't just, they can't just print off 500 copies of the same resume, the same CV, and then send them off to 500 jobs. You're not going to get a high hit rate in terms of people calling you for interview with that. What you need to do is you need to tie things into the job and show how you are relevant, that you're not going to be just sit in an office and do whatever you're told. That is useful, but you're not going to sit in an office and do whatever you're told, and it doesn't matter whether you get fired the next day. You need to make sure that in this knowledge-based economy, you are showing that you have value for the employers. Think about the action verbs. Think about what you have delivered in the past. Think about what you've done in the past. What have you given the students? Break down little things. So if you've been teaching, what have you delivered to the students? How have you delivered it? What have you had to do? My job, I have to take a book, a textbook, and I have to explain the key points that the students need to master to actually understand the concepts, and then we can build on those concepts. That requires a lot of filtering. That requires a lot of deconstructing complex ideas for a target, for a specific audience, and then reconstructing them in an accessible way. Think about what you've delivered to people. Think about the value that you've given, the value that you've brought to a certain task. How can you make that relevant? Always talk in terms of specific amounts. So don't just say, I hope I increased. So always talk in specific amounts. Always say, I hope I increased something by about 25%. Get numbers, get reports. Go back and look at the report writing lecture. Get the statistics, get the numbers. Tell people what tell people how you increased, how you improved, by how much you improved, by how much you reduced something. Be specific, don't be vague, don't be general. This will always go against you. In terms of layout, you want balance, you want consistency. The golden rule generally is don't use more than 2 fonts. We want to look at size 11, size 12, Times New Roman. We look at these things, we make things accessible, we make things easy to read. It's an informational document. It is a report on your academic background. It is a report on your entire employment history. So do make sure that people can actually read it. Don't use a comic book font. Don't aim for off the wall. Don't aim for cute or funny or witty or wacky. Just keep it simple, keep it straightforward. There are lots of different things, lots of different choices that you actually need to make. Always go for the most conservative, always go for the most straightforward, always go for the most accessible. This is the key thing. There is a lot of choices available in word processing packages now. Don't go overboard with fonts, colors. Bright pink on white background doesn't look good, okay? Think about your audience from every angle. That's what I'm saying. Strive for consistency, strive for balance, okay? Balance means that you need to look at the academic history, and you need to look at the employment history, and you need to make sure that equal amounts of space is given over. You get equal amounts of information. You don't just say that I've got a degree in accounting from Reading University. You need to add a little bit more there, okay? You need to add a little bit more of what you actually did, what you took away from this degree in accountancy, why you are different from the other 600 people who also graduated from the accounting department in Reading University. Okay, make sure there's a level of balance there. We don't want to hire someone. We don't really want to hire someone who has an insane amount of academic background, but very, very little in the way of actual practical experience. There is supposed to be a balance in that, where people will be able to have the practical experience and the academic theory to actually, back up, and the two skills will actually reinforce each other. It's really difficult when you're a first-time graduate, because how do you add experience to your resume when you have no experience? You need to actually tie in what you've got from the university, what you've got from your education, other than the certificate. So what did you take away from that? What relationship did you have with your professors? Think about these things. Go above and beyond what you think is necessary. A brief overview of some styles. These are 2 styles that are pretty common. You'll be able to find these templates all over the internet. They will help you with the consistency in terms of font, in terms of typeface, in terms of size of font as well. Use these templates. They take a lot of the heavy lifting out of writing a resume. Writing a CV, writing a resume is really, really difficult. You have to draft and redraft. You don't want to have to worry about the actual mechanics of what font to use, what size should be the font, what color should the fonts be. Let the computers do this. This is what they're used for. You can have a couple of these. These are simple, conservative, straightforward. There is absolutely nothing wrong with these. Nobody actually gets the job because they've got a flashy CV. You've got to really understand that. If you don't get the job, it probably means, and you were called for interview, it probably means that you did badly in the interview. It's not because your CV was not fancy with any of the graphics. Speaking of some of the graphics, you can have things like this. You can have really fancy charts and pie charts and bar graphs showing how you've improved your performance and things like that. Don't worry if this is not your thing, or if you think this looks a little bit too overwhelming. Don't worry about that. Just stick with the straightforward one. Again, it is just a step to getting the interview. It is not a guaranteed way of getting the job. Having a stellar CV is not, even movie stars will get turned down for certain jobs, even though they've got an absolutely outstanding CV. So don't beat yourself up too much about this. Spend time on it, but don't beat yourself up if you don't get the job. CVs and personal statements. CVs and personal statements both tell stories based on facts, and you need to get that narrative in there, okay? The personal statements tell a story of how context led to the facts. So the personal statements will show you how a process, how a set of circumstances led to you being described in this way. So you will have a degree, you will have a master's degree, you will have studied at this university and that university. You need to show the story behind those facts in the personal statement. Okay. The narratives should communicate your motivation for staying in the university, for going off to the jungle and performing experiments on frogs, or whatever it is, whatever is your speciality. So you need to look at what is the story behind that, beyond the monetary gain, beyond the idea that your teachers told you that joining a bank would be a great way of earning a lot of money and getting a good mortgage and getting a good house. Well, that's incidental, really. You're supposed to be here because of the love of the subject. You need to actually get that across in your personal statements there. So think about motivation, think about desires, think about the conflicts that you've had to deal with. Show that story as in the personal statement. You don't really need to focus on this in the CV as much. The personal statement shows the motivation and the drive. The CV tells the story of the facts that happened after the motivation. Your personal statement should be nearly 80, 70, your personal statement should be 80 to 90% academic achievements. This is what we should be aiming for. You're applying for an academic position. You're applying for an academic job, essentially, where you are being paid in knowledge. You're a knowledge-based worker now, and you will be paid in that knowledge. So you're applying for this position. It's highly competitive. You need to make sure that you've got the academic chops to actually take on these academic positions as a student. Remember, the university is teaching as well as learning. So you really need to make sure that you broadcast, that you've got the stamina to actually go to the library, teach yourself for 30, 35 hours a week, and be able to present that information and apply the information in a lab, in a class later on. Okay. So as you progress through academia, the directed instruction will be less and less. There'll be more of a focus on practical application and going off into the library and actually just digesting the facts and going through the books and absorbing the knowledge, drilling it in. You need to broadcast this on the personal statement that you are able to actually do that, and you're not going to slack off at the weekend. You're not going to just say, I've got a cold, I'm not going to do the work. You can't do that. You need to go in, day out, rain, shine, snow, whatever the illness is, you need to be able to push through that. Okay. The rest, the other 10, 15, 20% will be made up of stories about you, things that you've done in the past, hobbies, activities, and at the end, a summary of why you would be a good choice. You need to sell yourself in this. The CVs, the resumes, the personal statement, it's all about selling yourself, okay? You can't lie, you can't exaggerate, but you can present yourself in the best possible light. Personal statements serve many purposes. They can cover a multitude of sins. They can account for disappointing grades. Yeah, you can actually use the personal statement to account for disappointing grades. You can account for gaps in your education, okay? So I know that this is pretty much unheard of in China, but life does throw things at you. You can be ill in the final exam. You have to take the exam again. You have to defer that exam. These things happen. You might be one of these people that just doesn't do well on exams, but does well in terms of interpersonal skills. The personal statement can explain some, but not all, of the gaps in the education or disappointing grades that you've got, or any of these kind of things that you think need an explanation that would go against you negatively. So the personal statement will be there to provide some explanation for the facts. The personal statement also serves as a chance for you to reflect on what you have actually learned in the course of your higher education. You need to be able to present that. You need to be able to cut through the idea that you've been caught up in this kind of whirlwind while everybody else was going to university. Why did you choose to go to university? What were your personal motivations on this? It's a personal statement, so make it personal. You have to show your uniqueness, and you have to surprise people as well. Be memorable, sparkle in writing. That is the main thing here. The personal statement will also help you with interview preparation. If you can start by asking the difficult questions, you will also have those answers for the difficult questions as well. So if you just if you just explain to people that I really want to do this because I really want to do a finance job, because I want a job at PwC, because I think it's my dad works there and he'll be able to get me a good job. This does not really broadcast your motivation, your investment of your time in this. External motivation like that is usually the worst factor that influences your motivation, so I would not put that. Look intrinsically, look kind of, think, really think about it. What do you get from it? Why do you like doing this? You should like doing it because you're going to be doing it day in, day out in agonizing detail for the next 2 or 3 years at least, and then you're going to have to write about it as well. The purpose of the personal statement is to show your uniqueness amongst all the other applicants. What is special about you? Give people a glimpse of your personality, give people a glimpse of your identity. You're not just a factory worker anymore. We have a knowledge-based economy now, and you need to show what knowledge, how you've taken stuff from your professors, from the textbooks, and you've distilled it with your own personal interests as well. Okay, so don't just write a mechanical list of things that you think that the HR people at the university are looking for. You need to show your uniqueness of character. Try and establish some kind of connection with the unseen committee. So like I said, the personal statement is more of an interview on paper where you can't answer any questions. So you need to present yourself. You need to present yourself as a well-rounded individual who's going to survive both academically and socially on campus, usually, probably, in another country. We need to see that in your personal statement. You need to think about what the content is going to be actually. So why is the personal statement such a persuasive document? You need to ask yourself, will the committee feel inspired from reading my personal statement? Can they trust that I will be committed to this field of study? These are two things that you need to get across really quite clearly, is that you're a self-starter. You don't sit around waiting for direction from professors. You go in there and you do things off your own bat. You do things independently. We want to see this. We need this innovation. It's how the universities make money, is by developing technologies and then licensing them. They don't want a lot of people just to come in and kind of do what they're told. You need to have that. It's that Google 10% of time, personal time to develop your own personal projects. We want to encourage this kind of serendipity. Research doesn't happen in a vacuum. You need to go and plow through reams and reams of printed material, distill that, mix it with your own experiences, and then come up with something new. Are we going to see that in your personal statement? If you don't, you're going to have to start thinking about rewriting it. The other thing with the personal statement is that we need to see that you've had past accomplishments, that you've not just coasted along in your past courses. It really is a record of your motivation. The motivation that leads to the facts, the motivation that needs to be there, and you need to really communicate that in your personal statement. So think about these questions, critically assess your own writing. It really, really does make a big difference. Principles of Organization, Part 1. The big question, where have you been? We're talking about this idea of self-reflection. We're talking about this idea of personal journeys. Where have you been? Where did you come from? How did you get here? Okay. Think about that journey. What did you do? What motivated you? Try to avoid these cliches. My father was an accountant, and from a young age, I always wanted to be an accountant because a lot of Chinese students have this kind of self-discovery story. Try and think about something that really piqued your interest. If you're struggling to find something to talk about, just be honest, okay? If you really didn't like studying to be an accountant, if you really didn't like your father pushing you into accountancy, but then you discovered something and it all clicked together and it suddenly became all interesting at once, talk about that. It's not shameful to be thinking about, nobody likes doing hard work. Think about where you've come from and think about where you are now. What is the difference? What is the sequence of events that led to this, to you being at a certain university, at Tsinghua, Peking, at Renmin University? What is the sequence of events? Get the emotion in there as well. Okay. Part 1, Part 1, where did you come from? Part 2, where are you now? Part 3, where do you think you're going? Okay. What are your career objectives here? You have to have a clear idea now. High school has been and gone. Everybody has a basic level of literacy and numeracy. Now we need to talk about the actual nitty-gritty of your career and what you want to do with it. And you need to illustrate that and you need to communicate that to the committee that's going to be deciding whether you join the department or not in whichever institution you want to join later on. Illustrate these. It should really come together in a nice flow. Part 1, where did you come from? Part 2, where are you now? And Part 3, how are you going to tie that together and project it into the future so that you will actually illustrate to the hiring and firing folks at the university, we need to have this person in our faculty. Think about this. It's self-reflection. It's your journey. Think about how you're going to actually narrate that journey. What will you do after graduation? You need to say something a little bit more than, go back to my hometown, come back to China. What is the value that you're going to give back to that institution? Universities are underfunded. Professors don't earn a terrific amount of money. What are you going to do to contribute to campus life after your graduation? Think about this. Think about your value as a knowledge-based worker. Purpose of the CV, purpose of the personal statement. Here are some quotes that I've got from professors that are actually in the departments, popular departments. I'm not going to tell you which ones they are. They get a huge number of applicants every year, and this is what they say. So in terms of expectation, it's always useful to look at what these people are expecting from you rather than just try and guess what is the best thing to say to them. I don't really want the story of a student's life, although there are exceptions, but rather plans and a vision for the future. Again, we're talking about extending this vision for the future, talking about planning for the future, 25 years ahead, 20 years ahead, 10 years ahead. What is the plan after your graduation? You can't just write, make a ton of money, although that would be nice. You have to have a clear vision. How has your past academic experiences built up this vision for the future of how you want to change? You don't need to want to change the world, but you need to want to change one aspect of it at least. What we're looking for at that stage is some insight into how the student thinks, what sort of clarity of purpose she has into one or more research areas. So in terms of, it's no longer about what you know, it's more about how you think, how you distill knowledge, how you take on board ideas, how you apply them with your background, what makes you unique, how are you going to take Western concepts about a certain aspect of economics, how would you transplant that to China? Think about this, show it in your personal statement. In terms of your character, what are professors looking for? What are the HR guys looking for? I want to get a sense of what the applicant is all about. First, they should tell me where they're coming from, shown in part 1. What is in their background that leads them to apply to a program like ours? So they need to see something a little bit more than extrinsic outside motivation. They want to know that you are absolutely driven by something that you can't explain to actually complete this course. Second, they should tell me what it is they want to get out of our program. So what will you take away from that program? Not the certificate. That is nice, but not the certificate. And third, I want to know where they hope our program will eventually take them in their career. So we've got this repeated theme again. Forward planning, a vision for the future. It's not just the idea that you earn more money and you have a better life. We're talking about personal fulfillment, a personal journey, personal enrichment. And the last thing, competence. I think the main thing is to see whether the student is aware and has thought about the field in which he or she is applying. Does he or she know anything at all about it? Has this person identified some of the key issues that are active in research? And does he or she have some familiarity with issues in the field? So it's this idea that in the field there are certain problems, there are certain sticky points, there are certain clunky bits that we haven't really figured out despite having the best people in the industry, despite having the lead professors in our field. There are still some problematic areas. Have you looked at these problematic areas? What are your thoughts on them? We're talking about your competence here. How can you apply your knowledge to potentially solving some of these big problems that might be in the field? Physics is one field where you will always have one professor with one theory and then another professor will come up with another theory. and they will conflict. How would you resolve this conflict? Think about this, think about it's all about imaginative solutions. Start off with solving some of the problems in your field. The other mistake people make is talking about something they know nothing about. They'll say, I want to do something in international relations without indicating they have any idea what that means. Avoid vague statements, avoid generalizations. This is the kiss of death. It shows that you don't know what you're talking about if you just talk in a vague, general way. Someone asks you what your favorite music album is, you tell them what your favorite music album is. You don't say, I like all of his stuff. Be specific. This really illustrates that you know what you're talking about. Name drop. Tell people about famous professors that you've met. Tell them about conversations that you had. Be specific. Don't be vague. Don't be general. Or I want to go and cure the problems in the Middle East, or I want to go and work for the United Nations. These kind of grandiose statements indicate to me that the person doesn't know the realities of career opportunities in the field. So we're talking about a practical, realistic approach to what you're going to be doing after the PhD, after the master's degree. It's always this idea of looking to the future and having researched the field. So how do you write your personal statement? You start off, you look at the institution, you research the strengths of it, okay? You look at the diversity in the faculty, you look at the leading professors, you look at the people that you're supposed to have read these books. Research the institution, again, your writing should be relevant, it should be connected with the position that you're applying for in the same way that the CV should be connected with the job that you're applying for. If you do have some challenges, if you do have some personal issues, you should acknowledge them, you should discuss them, look at them as personal areas for improvement. For example, if you're rambling, if you tend to ramble on, if you tend to be vague, address that in the personal statement. Say that you try to rein it in, that you struggle to do this. You've actively acknowledged it and you're looking at fixing that in the future. Okay, you've got to really think about yourself in a critical way. Avoid cliches like the plague. Don't put these things in there. Think about really what are the problems that are unique to you and how have you addressed them. And finally, practice writing content. The next couple of slides will have a couple of exercises that you can do that will help you with that. Very, very briefly, you have to practice talking about yourself in a deep way. Okay. So activity number 1, using the questions on the next slide, work interview style to produce and document ideas. You would spend around 10 minutes on this. Don't spend a huge amount of time on this. You want to get stuff done very, very quickly. Okay, so reflecting on your personal identity and commitment. Question 1. Do you suffer from imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome is the idea that you feel that you're not really supposed to be here. Okay? Do you just want to be in the field just for prestige? A lot of people do. What convinced you to become part of the field? Where are you going to take another path? How do you think these things are going to lead on? In what ways do you think this field adds to the evolution of human thought? Why do you feel capable of being a productive member of this field? And how do you want to contribute to this field? So just take 10 minutes, briefly answer these questions. They're very, very basic self-discovery, your personal journey. Look at that, ask these questions, take about 10 minutes to write down the answers. You'll be able to build your personal statement from that. Can you reflect on your professional identity? Ask yourself these questions. What's so special? What's so unique about your personal history? You need to think about this. Sell yourself. Again, use these questions it's not a self-critical thing. These are questions that you're going to have to answer in an interview. You're going to have to ask these things when you're halfway through your degree course. You're going to have to ask these things. Why am I here? What am I doing? What is my ultimate objective in the future? Use these questions, they will help you develop some direction. The last activity is, can you remember any aha moments from your studies? Was there any moments where everything just seemed to click together and everything just suddenly made sense? What was that moment? Choose two of them. You're going to have two of them. Think of them. Think of a professor that you had who explained it something and suddenly consciousness was elevated. Choose two of these moments. Write about them. Okay. Write down any texts, projects, activities, hobbies, hardships, or challenges that led you to the place that you're in now. Finally, we're going to have a look at how potentially negative things can be turned into positive things. Take a moment just to read through this text here. This was a guy who turned a negative into a positive. His family was evicted, and he ended up, his personal motivation was to apply for law school in order to actually fight against the evictions that he personally suffered. It's a nice way of turning a negative thing into a positive thing. It shows personal motivation. It shows that someone's got a background and a desire and a drive to actually complete this law degree, to go through to complete law school. Which would you think would be the better paragraph to have? My family was evicted from its apartment, with the landlord temporarily refusing to let us back in to retrieve our possessions, or the landlord illegally evicted us from his apartment, refusing us to allow us to retrieve our possessions. Think about how you're going to actually present the narration. Don't be too wordy. Don't use the first one. Use the second one. We don't want a lot of weepy. We don't want a lot of weepy backstory. We don't want people crying. We don't want people taking pity on you. Tell people what happened. You don't need to elaborate that much. And finally, juxtaposition. What was the difference? Talk about the difference between your perception and the reality of the course that you had, that is actually you're experiencing right now. It's all about personal discovery, adapting yourself to the situation. Really get into the habit of talking on this personal level in the personal statement. That's what it's there for. Finally, you'd be wanting to reduce the number of prepositions in your writing. You'd be wanting to reduce the amount of repetition in your writing. Okay. So in actuality, however, alcohol and domestic violence were creating an environment within our house that was for me both difficult and frightening. This is a little bit too long-winded, a little bit too difficult. Reduce that, make it more simple, make it more accessible. Don't spend too much time on these kind of sob stories. We don't really want to read that, okay? But we do need to know about your motivation personally. You can talk about going to medical school, talk about contact with what we've got here, undeserved populations, charity work, volunteer work. Again, look at ways of reducing things down. Don't go overboard with the emotion, but do give some background that you are personally motivated to actually do these things. Using your transitions purposefully, look at mixing up your language. We looked at this in the last lecture. Chronological and logical connectors, first, second, third, fourth, fifth. It does get very boring. Use precise markers, things like, for the past few years, after conducting my research, I discovered, although I enjoyed studying X, Y engaged me more. Think about how you can use phrases, think about how you can use these things to actually signpost different parts of your academic life, different parts of your interest into a personal statement purposefully. Okay. Finally, you need to be discussing your objectives in a really realistic and adult way. So we'll take this example for a start. We've got someone applying here for an MBA. I'm particularly interested in finance as a cornerstone in the foundation of my career in business. I want to know more about such things as computer science as applied to finance in terms of projecting financial models and organizational behavior as it relates to working in groups. So we've got something very specific. This student here has a very clear idea of what they want to do after they graduate. Okay? Discuss these objectives, tell people where you want to end up. It really does help a lot. How do you do this? You start now. Read beyond your syllabus. Read the university websites, subscribe to the journals. All of them will have online MOOCs like this, they will all have these little kind of in-house journals that you can subscribe to. You need to be reading beyond your syllabus ideally. There's no real excuse for not doing it. If you're interested in the field, go and have a look at these things. You can get them. These are a couple of examples that I just found on the internet very, very briefly. A couple of really high-ranking universities with very, very good faculties. Go and do it. Go and do the reading. Go beyond the textbooks. Go beyond your actual syllabus that you've got now. Join the MOOCs. Join the online courses. Do them over summer. It really will help. Okay. So come to the conclusion. In review, use specific character traits that you got yourself. Make yourself unique. Make yourself stand out. Be selective. Don't give people your life story. Choose the most memorable parts of your life story so far. Present those. Think about the aha moments. Choose 2 of those. Talk about that, okay? Watch your tone. Don't appear too confident. Don't appear too timid. Don't appear too boring. Don't appear too repetitive. Use the synonyms. Use the transitions that we've talked about in these last 2 lectures. It all adds to tone and color in your writing. Finally, don't hide behind your academic achievements. We want to know about you as a person, and we want to know about your academic achievements. But if you think that you're a boring person, don't just rely on your academic achievements to get you into the institution. We need to know your personality, your identity, not just your academic achievements just aren't going to carry it all by themselves. It's all about you. It's your personal statement. Tact, respect, thoughtfulness. These are all things that you need to get into your writing. Friendliness. Use correct grammar. Select appropriate details. Balance your writing between what you can do for the program and what the program can do to you. Show that you can contribute on campus. Okay. And with all of that said and done, please do remember that it is just a personal statement. It is not The Apprentice, Celebrity Apprentice, okay? Some people get into the institutions that they want to get into. Other people don't. That's just the way it is. There will be a number of different factors affecting your selection onto a certain program. Redraft, make sure that you balance it academically, socially. Make sure that you show people that you will be able to survive in both of these worlds on campus, especially if it's in a foreign country that isn't China. And of course, best of luck with your application. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll see you again soon.